Welcome to the St. Thomas More Lynchburg's Homily Podcast. We join Father John Christian as he brings his insight and application to the readings for the 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time.
With the current Olympic Games going on, I'm sure many of you have been aware of the furor going around and all the headlines having to do with that opening ceremony. I have to confess that I myself hadn't seen it, and usually I'm unaware of these sorts of things because I kind of prefer to be under a little bit of a rock where it's nice and cozy, and I get to go unaware of all this. However, I just found out yesterday that the Holy See actually responded to it, communicating the Pope's kind of sadness at such a depiction of, such a blasphemous depiction, frankly. And for those of you who were spared seeing it, I guess out of morbid curiosity, I went and looked, and it was rather dreadful. I mean, it was this blasphemous tableau of several transvestites that were posed kind of like Da Vinci's depiction of the Last Supper. And so I looked at that, and while it was gruesome to behold, the thing that most kept troubling me in my mind as I looked at that image was I thought, this is something that is happening in Paris, France. This is happening in France. And I was sitting there thinking, for several centuries, France was a nation that was referred to as the eldest daughter of the church, right? France was the garden of Europe, the flower of chivalry, and was the bastion that held firm in the face of so many heresies that were readily accepted by much of Northern Europe, at least until her own revolution. And so it got me thinking, what happens? How can the same place, the same civilization whereby we saw the invention of Gothic architecture, right, that highest expression of ecclesiastical architecture, how do we go from that to that blasphemous depiction within a mere 500 years? What happened? Now, that's a question well beyond my capacity to even begin to try to unravel, for it's a multifaceted problem. But I think a lot of it lies in kind of the loss of perspective that's so kind of concomitant to our human condition, right? We human beings can indeed become very myopic and lose that proper perspective. Hence, a lot of the features of those Gothic structures that France is so famous for, like Notre Dame, the spires on them, all these little subtle things, whether it's the lancet windows or the multiple spires, everything oriented upward, with the idea being that there is an ultimate destination. There is more than just what we see right down here on this horizontal plane, but rather there is a vertical orientation as well. And those pointing spires, they remind us that, in point of fact, we are destined for more. There is an ultimate destination, that this life isn't it. Another feature that you find in a lot of those medieval structures is something they refer to. It's a motif that they will refer to as a memento mori, just Latin for remember to die. The idea being that it reminds us all, and though it sounds macabre at first, but if you reflect on it, it's quite beautiful. It reminds us all that this isn't it. This will pass, and we are destined for something truly greater, right? That union with God. And so when that particular perspective is lost, is when things can begin to go awry, and you can see things like a blasphemous depiction of the Lord's Supper, when that perspective in our human being has been lost. Many of our parishioners who are older might remember studying the Baltimore Catechism when they were children, and it had those wonderful kind of answers and questions. And there was the one that said, "What is your purpose?" And the answer went something to the effect of, to know God, to love God, and to serve God, and to be with him in eternity. And that encapsulates our entire Christian perspective. It is one that's eternal. We're called to not have just merely a long view in regards to the things of the world, but an eternal perspective in the spiritual view. And I think that's what our Lord Jesus Christ reminds us in this very gospel reading. When those people go around, they climb in boats because they want to go and continue to be with him, to hear what he has to say. And he looks at them and he says, it's a little peculiar at first, but he goes, you sought me out because you ate your fill of the loaves, but work not for food that perishes. Jesus reminds us that we have to go beyond the things of the day-to-day. Even though they are important, we have to attend to them. Lest we die. We have to do our work. We have to look after our families. We have things we're accountable for. That is all true. but it's putting it into that right perspective. Jesus reminds us we have to work for that food that does not perish, that does not spoil. They talk about the manna and the quail in the deserts, but both things were perishable. When the Israelites received the quail and that the Lord had sent and the manna that had come down from heaven, whatever quail they didn't capture would just fly away, and the manna couldn't be stored. If you remember in Exodus, if they try to store it, it spoils. And so these are things that pass by. But Jesus instead offers us the alternative. He offers that food that endures for all time. His very own body, blood, soul, and divinity. And that is the food that that gives us the fuel that we need to actually orient ourselves for that eternal destination, that spiritual journey to which we're all called to. Because the days on this earth, they are fleeting. Time goes quickly. Each one of us ultimately moves towards our end. But as Christians, we know that isn't all of it. There is more beyond, and that's what Jesus reminds us and calls us to prepare for. That's what the Eucharist does for us. It is our spiritual nourishment that we might be fed, fueled, and receive the grace to move towards that eternity spent with God. And it's a hard thing to think about because there are many things that have claims on our time and that distract us or that we have to tend to on this earth. And I'm not saying that we can forget them or push them aside, but we have to put them in perspective because we have to remember that it is all of a piece and that we are moving towards that ultimate destination with our Lord Jesus Christ. And so then for us, the task and the challenge is to take seriously what we do as Christians. To take seriously what our Lord Jesus Christ said to us and what we profess each and every time we gather together as his church, especially around the altar of sacrifice, especially here in the context of the holy sacrifice of the Mass. For we as Christians are called to partake of the Eucharist, but because indeed we do need it, but we have to do it properly, and we have to ask ourselves, do I consent? Do I assent to everything that is stated in this? Do I believe that this is truly body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ made present to us on the altar, through those words of Jesus Christ that the priest is privileged to say? And it's not a question that it's a question that all of us have to ask ourselves and be honest with ourselves about. I myself am not exempted just by virtue of being a priest, because God forbid the day ever came that this became so routine that even I forget what it is I'm saying and what it is that's really going on right here. This is where we receive that food that endures forever and strengthens us for that eternal destination. And so then each and every one of us has that duty, obligation, and deep down under all that, even that desire to live in that right fashion and be in that right relationship with God, that we can rightly receive what he offers us. We ought not ever let anything come between us in receiving this wayfaring food, this food that brings us to where we're supposed to go. Whether it's unconfessed sins, they need to be brought to confession. If it's grudges, if it's Mass becomes inconvenient to get to for a reason that is not substantial, we don't want to let anything come between us in receiving him, receiving the one who brings us to that union with himself. And it can be difficult, but it is what we're called to. And in grace, it is what we can accomplish. And so when I was, again, kind of reflecting on how is it that the place that was once kind of the pinnacle of Christian civilization could become the host to such a despicable scene, that's not something that we can necessarily fix right off the bat. Like, we can't just rebuild Christendom as a notion. But what we can do is start with ourselves. I feel that the world would be a very different place and look very differently if each and every person across the globe just paused for even 1 minute and lifted their heart and mind up into union with God through prayer. And while each person across the globe might be ambitious, we can still work towards it. But imagine if each and every Christian, let's just start with that, around the entire globe took seriously all that they profess in the Nicene Creed that we say every Sunday, if they took seriously all that we've received and has been handed down to us through the wisdom of the ages and the saints and the divine revelation of our Lord himself, if we can take all of this and internalize it and treat it with the reverence and respect and seriousness that it calls of us and that it requires on our part, things will look different. And so then, as Christians, we are privileged to receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. And we are right to always be thankful for that which our Lord Jesus gives us. So let us always remember to do our part, to be thankful, to be grateful, and to never let anything come between us and that food that endures for all eternity, the precious body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ, the bread of life given to us for our ultimate purpose, our ultimate destination, union with God for all time.
Thank you for tuning in to the St. Thomas More Lynchburg's Homily Podcast. For the daily reading and to learn more about the community of St. Thomas More, please visit our website at www.stmva.org. If you were blessed by our podcast today, please give it a like, a kind review, and share it with a friend. God bless.